family was supposed to mean safety. That's what I believed, until I walked back into the house my father built and smelled cedar mixed with betrayal. My brother's fists hovered above me, and my sister's voice sliced through the air. "Do it, Cole. Make her sign." They erased me from photos, from stories, even from the will, as if blood ties could be rewritten with a single lie. But I kept every receipt they wanted to burn. If you've ever felt erased by the very people meant to protect you, lean in, because this is how I fought to exist. The subject line glared at me from my laptop screen. Family meeting urgent. Just 3 words, typed without warmth, without punctuation, without even a trace of the brother I used to know. Cole's name sat beside it, and beneath, almost like an afterthought, was Sabrina's. My fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly, as though the very act of opening that email would reopen wounds that had never quite healed. I clicked anyway. The message was brutally short. "Come to the house Tuesday at 5 p.m. We'll explain. No greeting, no "how have you been?" Not even a courtesy line about the weather. Just a demand. I stared at it for a long time, hearing the silence of my small apartment pulse in my ears. That house, my father's house, the one he built with his bare hands, each beam measured twice, each nail hammered with a kind of pride that smelled of cedar and sweat. 1,000 memories flooded me at once. The lemon oil he used every Saturday, rubbing it into the wood until the entire place glowed. The screen door's uneven squeak that announced every arrival, even when we tried to sneak in past curfew. The initials carved into the edge of the dining table, the messy scrawl of a girl who wanted to prove she was part of something permanent. My father didn't scold me when I carved those letters. He just smiled, said, "Now the wood knows your name too." But permanence is a lie. I knew that now. I debated for hours, pacing the apartment, folder of old receipts half buried under bills on my desk. I had kept them all, property taxes I paid the year Dad got sick, utility bills I covered when Cole disappeared for months. Proof that I wasn't just visiting that house, I was sustaining it. Maybe that was why I finally shoved the folder into my bag, locked the door, and drove towards Springfield. The June air pressed against me like a damp hand, sticky and relentless. I parked at the curb, staring at the house that loomed like a half-remembered dream. From the porch, I swore I could still smell the mix of cedar and lemon oil. My chest tightened, the way it always did when memory collided with the present. I knocked once, softly, before stepping inside. Cole was pacing in the living room, hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't look at me, didn't even attempt a hug. Sabrina sat at the dining table, poised like a queen waiting for her subject. Beside her, a stranger in a too tight suit shuffled papers into a neat stack. "Sit," Sabrina said, gesturing to the lone chair opposite her. Her smile was sugar over steel. I sat. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Ellison, we're here to discuss an urgent adjustment to the mortgage." The words knocked the air out of me. Mortgage? Sabrina slid a folder across the table, her manicured fingers tapping the edge like this was a friendly dinner and not an ambush. I opened it slowly. Heavy paper, a notary seal gleaming at the corner, and there, near the bottom, was my father's signature. Only it wasn't. The tilt was wrong, the spacing uneven. My father's hand was steady until the day he died, and this was not his writing. My stomach turned to stone. "Did Dad sign this before he passed?" My voice cracked, but I held the paper tight. He agreed, Sabrina said smoothly. You know how he always wanted to protect family. I turned to Cole. His eyes darted anywhere but mine. Cole, did he sanadingi? You're overthinking, he muttered. This is for all of us. Just sign. I looked closer, forcing my vision to steady through the rising pulse in my head. That seal, stamped in faint ink, belonged to someone I recognized. A family friend, my mother's old companion from church picnics, the one who used to slip me lemon drops when I was a child. My chest tightened. Why would his notary mark be here? Why would he lend his name to this? Twist punched through me harder than Cole's fists ever could. This wasn't just a forged signature, it was collusion. I pushed the folder back across the table. My voice shook, but I made sure the words were clear. I'm not signing. The room went silent. Sabrina's smile curdled, her eyes narrowing to slits. Cole rubbed his forehead like my refusal was nothing more than an inconvenience. The lawyer coughed, shifting in his seat. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on me, reminding me just how small I was in their eyes. I stood, chair scraping against the wood floor, with a sound that cut the silence clean in half. If Dad really wanted this, I said, he would have told me. He didn't. So, no. Their silence followed me out the door, heavier than any blow. The house smelled the same, but for the first time, it felt foreign, like I had been evicted from a memory that once kept me warm. The next afternoon, I stood at the entrance of the community hall. A flimsy paper program pressed into my hand by a volunteer who didn't even meet my eyes. Memorial service for Thomas Ellison. My father's name in bold, but nowhere inside the folded paper was mine. Not in the order of service, not in the acknowledgements. It was as though I had never been his daughter at all. I lingered near the doorway, scanning the rows of chairs. People murmured in clusters, sipping from plastic cups, balancing plates of cold sandwiches. I recognised neighbours, old church acquaintances, men who had once shaken my father's calloused hand. Their eyes slid past me quickly, landing anywhere else. Some nodded with stiff politeness. Most pretended not to see me. When the slideshow began, I moved closer. Images flashed on the screen. Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, even the hospital room in his final days, Cole at his side. Sabrina holding his hand, and me. I searched every frame, pulse pounding, but I was absent. Entire years of my life edited out. My throat burned as I watched my father's story told without me in it. I had been erased not only from their future, but retroactively from our past. The pastor invited anyone who wished to share a memory to step forward. My legs carried me down the aisle before my mind could stop them. I remembered a story, small, almost silly, about how Dad and I once tried to fix the lawnmower together, ending up covered in grease, but laughing until we cried. It was nothing profound, just a fragment that proved I had been there, that I mattered. I reached for the microphone, but Sabrina was suddenly beside me, her hand light but firm on the mic stand. Her voice carried sweetly, deceptively, over the hushed room. "Let's keep this about Dad," she said, smiling to the crowd, as if she were saving them from my intrusion. Polite chuckles rippled. The mic was pulled away before I even spoke. I froze under the weight of dozens of eyes. Their looks weren't sympathetic. They were suspicious, assessing. A few shook their heads, lips pressed thin. It was as if they had already been told a story about me, one where I was unstable, ungrateful, the daughter who made drama. Twist, stabbed, sharp. This wasn't ignorance, it was narrative. Cole and Sabrina had already been here, whispering, shaping perception before I arrived. The crowd wasn't neutral, they were primed. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I turned and walked back down the aisle, the soles of my shoes loud against the linoleum. I returned to the back of the hall and stood still, hands clenched around the paper program until it tore at the crease. When the service ended, clusters of people avoided me. One woman brushed by with a faint smile, but eyes that said "poor thing." Another muttered, "It's sad, really?" to her companion, as if I were an exhibit instead of a daughter. The air smelled of wilting flowers and stale coffee, but beneath it all was the acrid stench of something rotting, the story Sabrina had sold them. I slipped out before anyone else could speak to me. The June evening pressed hot against my skin as I walked the cracked sidewalk back to my car. My hands shook as I slid the key into the ignition. Back in my rented room, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor, the silence louder than the voices I had just fled. For a long time I stayed there back against the bed frame, staring at the box I had brought home years ago after the funeral. The cardboard edges were soft from age, the corners taped over more than once. Slowly, with hands that felt too heavy, I pulled it closer. Inside lay trinkets, a keychain from high school, a photograph of Dad holding me on his shoulders at the county fair. Beneath the clutter, tucked carefully between old bank slips, was an envelope. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, sealed, but never opened. Across the front, in unmistakable handwriting, was my name. Not Talia, not Child, just Mara. I traced the letters with my finger, my throat tightening, my father's hand, my father's voice trapped in ink. And suddenly the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. I told myself I would never step back inside that house again. Yet 2 nights later, I found my hand on the doorknob. The unopened envelope with my father's handwriting still sat in my bag, heavy as stone. I hadn't read it yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I convinced myself I needed answers. I needed to look Cole in the eye and ask how far he and Sabrina were willing to go. The porch light was off, but the house wasn't asleep. Shadows moved behind the lace curtains, voices low but urgent. I knocked once. No one answered. I knocked again, harder. The door creaked open under my hand, as if the hinges themselves had given up. Inside, the air was sharp, metallic. I stepped into the kitchen, my father's kitchen, where the lemon oil had long since been replaced by the smell of cold coffee and stale smoke. Cole stood near the counter, shoulders hunched, fists flexing at his sides. Sabrina leaned against the wall, her arms folded, eyes glittering with the same icy composure she'd wielded at the memorial. "What are you doing here?" Cole's voice was low, dangerous. "I came to talk," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You need to stop this. Dad didn't sign those papers. You know he didn't." Sabrina laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, Mara, you always think you're the exception. That house isn't yours. It never was." I set my bag on the table. "I paid taxes when you disappeared, Cole. I kept the lights on. Don't tell me I was never part of this family." Cole's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists. He took one step closer, then another. My chest tightened, but I held my ground. "Dad left something for me," I said. You know it. Sabrina's voice cut through the tension like glass. If you think he left you anything, you're delusional. Everything that mattered was given to us. You were always temporary. Her words struck harder than any blow. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage. You erased me from his story, I whispered. Cole's fist came down fast. Pain exploded across my cheek, white-hot and dizzying. I stumbled back, hitting the edge of the table. My bag spilled open, receipts and papers scattering like confetti across the floor. "Sign the damn papers!" Cole snarled, his face red, spit at the corner of his mouth. "Do it, and this ends." I clutched the edge of the table, forcing myself upright. "No." Sabrina's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, her voice low, almost intimate. "You think Dad gave you something? You think he wanted you to have that house?" She leaned in so close I could smell the bitter tang of her perfume. "He didn't. You're holding on to a ghost. That house belongs to us. And soon it won't matter what you believe. You'll see." Twist cut deep. Not only had they forged, they were rewriting my father's intent entirely. Cole's hand rose again. I braced myself, but a sound sliced through the moment, sharp, urgent, unmistakable. "Hey, what the hell's going on in there?" The voice came from outside, rough with age. Mr. Ed Dwyer, our neighbour, his porch light spilling across the lawn. I heard his footsteps, pounding closer, his voice rising. "I'm calling the cops." Cole froze. Sabrina hissed something under her breath. The next seconds blurred. The slam of the screen door, my body folding to the floor, the sting of bruises already blooming. Then came the wail of sirens. Red and blue light splashed across the kitchen walls, surreal against the family photos that still hung there, photos where my face had long since been cut out. Paramedics lifted me, voices urgent, hands efficient. The stretcher felt cold, the straps too tight. Above it all, the siren's scream tore through the night, a cruel lullaby. I stared up at the ceiling of the ambulance, its fluorescent light bleaching everything flat, and thought, so this is what it takes for someone to finally see me. The hospital lights were too bright, a sterile white that made everything feel unreal. I lay in the narrow bed, my cheeks swollen, my ribs aching with every breath. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp and relentless. Nurses moved briskly through the hallways, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. I caught fragments of conversation as one nurse adjusted my IV. Her voice lowered, but not enough. Her own brother and sister? Really? I thought siblings fought, but not like this. The other nurse shook her head, murmuring, "Blood doesn't always mean loyalty." Their disbelief hung heavier than the pain. To them, I was an oddity. A woman beaten not by strangers, not by a partner, but by the people who shared her blood. The door creaked open hours later. My mother stepped inside, wearing the cardigan she always wore to church, the one with a missing button near the hem. For a moment, I almost believed she had come to comfort me. I wanted to believe. "Mara," she said softly, pulling the chair closer, "why did you have to make this so public?" I blinked. "They hit me, Mom. They forged Dad's signature. They're trying to take the house." Her eyes darted away, fixing on the blank wall. Families fight, but courtrooms, police reports. That's shameful. People are already talking. The words cut deeper than Cole's fists. "So you're saying I should have stayed silent?" My voice shook, sharp with disbelief. She pressed her lips tight, then sighed. "Your sister told me everything. She said it was for the good of all of us, that keeping the house afloat required sacrifices. I didn't agree with the way, but she paused, and my heart froze as she whispered, I knew about the mortgage. I chose not to intervene. It would have ruined our name. Twist hit like a second blow, my own mother, complicit by silence. I turned my face toward the window, unwilling to let her see the tears burning at the edges of my eyes. You let them erase me. She didn't answer. After a long silence, she stood, smoothed the cardigan over her lap, and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, a sound far colder than any slam. Hours passed in fragments of sleep and pain. When the door opened again, it wasn't my mother or a nurse. It was Lorna, a friend I hadn't seen in months. She carried a cardboard box, the edges taped and retaped. She set it gently on the bedside table. You asked me to bring this from your place, she said. Her eyes were kind, but she didn't ask questions. She just squeezed my hand, whispered, You're stronger than you think, and left. I stared at the box for a long time before pulling it closer. My fingers shook as I peeled back the tape. Inside, beneath layers of old receipts and utility bills, was something heavier. A small cassette recorder, the kind my father used years ago to capture his thoughts when he worked late in the garage. A strip of masking tape, labelled in his handwriting, for Mara. My breath caught. I set it aside carefully, afraid even to touch the play button. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed, edges brittle, my name written across it in the same steady script I'd traced so many times before. The weight of his voice, his hand, his intent. It was all here waiting? I gathered the papers from my bag, the receipts, tax slips, the fragments of proof I had clung to for years. For the first time, instead of scattering them, I arranged them neatly into a folder. I took a red marker from the bedside drawer, the kind nurses used for labelling forms, and wrote across the front, in thick, deliberate strokes, evidence. It was more than a label. It was a vow. I wasn't just holding scraps of paper anymore. I was building a case. I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing for war. The envelope had waited for me longer than I wanted to admit. It sat on the bedside table all night, its presence heavier than the IV taped to my arm. By morning, I couldn't stand the silence pressing against it any longer. My hands trembled as I broke the brittle seal. Careful not to tear the familiar script across the front, Mara. Inside was a folded letter, the paper yellowed, but still carrying the faint smell of cedar and oil, my father's world embedded into fibres. His handwriting flowed steady and deliberate. Every loop of ink, a voice resurrected. If you're reading this, Mara, then I'm gone. My throat tightened, but I kept going. This house was never just wood and nails. It was where we kept our promises, where we stood when storms came. And you were the one who stayed. When others left, you carried the weight without complaint. Don't let anyone take that from you. The house is yours, not because I loved you more, but because you showed up when no one else did. I clutched the page, heart pounding. The words settled into me like anchors, steadying me against the storm. He had seen me even when my mother, my brother, my sister pretended I didn't exist. He had written it down, proof that I was not invisible. Then I noticed the second paragraph, one I hadn't expected. There is an account in your name. I opened it when you were 17, just before your birthday. I wanted you to have something safe. Untouchable. It's not much, but it's yours alone. Don't forget it exists. I froze. 17. That was the year they claimed I had signed the mortgage adjustment. My father had made sure I had something in my name even before I was legally considered an adult. He had thought ahead, left me a shield I didn't know about. Twist, landed sharp. My father had prepared for this, had trusted me in a way no one else had. And Cole and Sabrina's scheme might have overlooked that very detail. I pressed the letter flat against the tray table and let out a breath that trembled. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. I reached for my bag, pulling out the folder I had marked evidence. One by one, I slid the documents into order. Receipts of property taxes, utility bills in my handwriting, bank slips showing payments I'd made when the house teetered on foreclosure. The letter went on top, encased in a plastic sleeve I begged from the nurse's station. It didn't matter if my hands shook or if the bruises ached. Each page I filed was a piece of myself reassembled, a voice they couldn't silence. Then came the scanner. The hospital had a small office for patient use, mostly for forms. I borrowed it with quiet determination. One by one, the documents passed beneath the glass. Each beep of the scanner was a heartbeat. Each file saved another nail in the coffin of their lies. Receipts became PDFs. Photos of bruises became digital evidence. The letter, carefully aligned, glowed blue on the screen before saving into a folder I titled, "They Won't Win." When I returned to the hospital bed, the folder heavier in my lap, I felt a shift. For years I had collected scraps of proof in shame, afraid they would call me obsessive, dramatic. But now they were bricks in the foundation of a defense, of a story I could finally tell without apology. The nurse peeked in to check my vitals, then paused. "You look different," she said softly. I almost laughed. Different maybe, or maybe I was finally looking like myself. I leaned back, clutching the folder against my chest. My father's words echoed through me, steady and unshakable. "You were the one who stayed." And I whispered to the empty room, "I'm still here." The legal aid office was tucked into a brick building downtown, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee the moment you stepped inside. I sat in the waiting area, clutching my folder, its edges warm from how tightly I held it against me. People came and went. Single mothers with strollers, an older man holding eviction papers. But all I could hear was my father's letter repeating in my head, "You were the one who stayed." When the receptionist finally called my name, I followed her into a modest office where a woman in her late 30s rose to greet me. She wore no-nonsense slacks, a navy blazer, and a face that carried both exhaustion and unwavering resolve. "Naomi Park," she said, shaking my hand. "Let's see what you've got." I laid the folder on her desk, sliding it open with care, as though the papers inside were living things. One by one, Naomi lifted each page: receipts, utility bills, photographs, scans of the bruises, and finally, the letter from my father encased in its sleeve. She read in silence, her eyes narrowing, her pen tapping lightly against the desk. When she reached the forged mortgage deed, she stopped. She pushed her glasses higher on her nose and leaned closer. "This signature," she said quietly, "when did you supposedly sign this?" "They said it was the year I turned 17, just a few months before my birthday." Naomi's brows shot up. 17? You weren't legally an adult. I frowned. But they told me it was just paperwork, a formality. Doesn't matter, she said firmly, sliding the page toward me. Any contract signed by a minor without a guardian co-signer is unenforceable. This alone can collapse the entire claim. Hope surged hot through me, almost dizzying. So, legally it doesn't count? Exactly, and that's before we even get into the coercion. She picked up the document again, her gaze locking on the faint notary seal stamped in the corner. Wait a second. She angled it toward the light. My breath caught. I knew that mark too well, the same one I'd recognized in my kitchen days earlier. Naomi tapped her pen against the embossed letters. This notary is on the city's land use committee, which means if your siblings pushed this through, they weren't just trying to secure the house. They were setting it up for the rezoning project. This is bigger than family greed. It's financial fraud. Twist jolted me cold. Cole and Sabrina hadn't just wanted the house. They wanted the land, the payout, the future profit from the redevelopment I had only glimpsed in whispers. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Mara, you're not fighting just a family dispute. You're fighting a conspiracy with financial incentives. That's why they erased you. They needed silence to protect the scheme. The room tilted slightly, but instead of collapse, I felt something steadier settle inside me. The folder in front of me was no longer just scraps of memory, it was ammunition. Naomi leaned back, folding her hands. Here's what we do next. You digitize everything, every email, every scan, every photo. Check metadata, timestamps, file origins, anything that proves authenticity. We'll build a timeline. I'll open a case file under your name. Ellison fraud case. From here on out, we document everything. I nodded, words caught in my throat. She continued, her voice softer now. It won't be easy. They'll push back hard. But you've got more proof than most of my clients ever start with. You're not crazy, Mara. You're credible. Tears stung my eyes, not from weakness, but from relief. For years I had carried evidence like shame. Now it had a name, a case. When I left the office, the sky was heavy with late afternoon light, the kind that painted the streets in muted gold. I walked to my car, folder clutched against me, sat in the driver's seat, and opened my laptop. My hands didn't shake this time as I composed a new email, subject line, Notice of Legal Intent, recipients Cole Ellison, Sabrina Ellison. Body, this is to formally notify you that I have retained legal representation and intend to challenge the 2012 mortgage deed transfer on grounds of minority status and coercion. All further communication should be directed to my attorney, Mara Ellison. I hovered over the send button only for a moment before clicking. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was quieter than a breath, but in that silence, I heard something else, momentum. The email had been sent less than a week when the next strike landed. It arrived not in my inbox, but in the company's general account, an anonymous message with a single link. By the time I arrived at work, whispers were already circulating in the hallway, subtle glances darting in my direction like knives sheathed in politeness. Linda, my supervisor, called me into her office. The blinds were drawn, her laptop turned toward me. This came in overnight, she said quietly. On the screen was a video, grainy but unmistakable. My face, my voice, but the words weren't mine, not like that. The clip was barely 30 seconds long. It showed me sitting on the edge of my bed, months earlier, eyes swollen from crying, voice raw. Only the audio had been cut, spliced, rearranged. Instead of grief, it sounded like confession. "I don't know what's real anymore," my altered voice said. "Maybe I imagined it all, maybe I lied." The caption beneath: "Greedy sister invents abuse to steal family home." My stomach plummeted. I remembered that night vividly, how Sabrina had encouraged me to record myself, saying it would help me process. She had even offered to clean up the audio for me, and now here it was, weaponized. Linda's eyes softened. "It's clearly been manipulated, but we needed to show you." I pressed my palms into my knees, steadying my breath. "Do you want the original file? I still have it." Her relief was immediate. "Yes, HR will need it." Within the hour, I forwarded the untouched recording, 48 minutes of me speaking haltingly through grief, exhaustion, betrayal. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. I attached the metadata, the file history, everything that proved authenticity. By late afternoon, HR had circulated a quiet memo. Mara Ellison was not under investigation. Any defamatory material would be handled legally. They offered me extended leave with pay, a letter of support if I needed it for court. The kindness nearly undid me more than the smear itself. For so long I had expected disbelief. Instead, I found a wall of quiet support. But the twist came later that night when Julian, the journalist I had spoken with briefly, called me. "I ran a trace on the IP address that uploaded the clip," he said. "It wasn't anonymous enough. It came from a device that's logged into Sabrina's accounts. Same device she used to post real estate listings last month." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. So it was her. Not rumour, not suspicion, proof. My sister hadn't just erased me, she had twisted my voice, reshaped my grief into lies, and broadcast it to the world. Julian hesitated. "Do you want this public?" I closed my eyes. Images of the memorial flashed. The crowd's suspicion, the whispers, the chuckles when Sabrina pulled the mic away. They had believed her once. They would believe her again unless I fought back. "Yes," I said. "But not yet. Not until it matters." I hung up and sat in the dark, my laptop open on the table. On one side of the screen, the doctored clip, grainy and cruel. On the other, the full original, complete with timestamps and metadata. Side by side, truth and lie. I saved them into the folder marked "They Won't Win." Each file had a place. Each piece another stone in the wall I was building. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was preparing. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against my apartment door, too firm to be casual. My chest tightened until I heard the familiar voice. "It's Ed. Open up." I unlatched the door and found him standing there, weathered ball cap pulled low, his grey eyes scanning the hallway before he stepped inside. He held a small plastic case in his hand, the kind used for flash drives. "Thought you should have this," he said, pressing it into my palm. My fingers curled around the cool plastic. "What is it?" "Audio," he muttered. "From my porch. I record birds sometimes, don't laugh, but a couple weeks ago I heard voices that didn't sound right. Figured I'd keep it rolling." I slid the drive into my laptop, heart thundering as the file opened. The recording was faint at first, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, then Cole's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "She's always been weak. Once she signs, we flip it. Easy money." Sabrina's reply followed, smooth and cold. "She won't sign without pressure. Make her. If she resists, we'll handle it. And don't worry. I already took care of the notary. He owes me after what I slipped him. My breath hitched. There it was, plain as day. Sabrina's voice admitting to bribery, collusion that went beyond family betrayal, and straight into criminal territory. Twist landed like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a forged signature. It was fraud, bribery, conspiracy. Ed shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck. Didn't know if it meant anything, but it sounded bad enough. It means everything, I whispered. The next morning, I was back in Naomi's office, the USB drive trembling in my hand as I slid it across her desk. She plugged it in, listened with professional detachment, though her eyes widened at the damning words. This, she said finally, changes the landscape. We'll file a supplemental motion immediately. Audio like this, tied with the forged documents and your minor status. This is powerful. She opened a new folder on her desktop, labeling it with deliberate keystrokes, Ellison fraud case, evidence B. Do not lose this, she added, and back it up twice. I nodded, the weight of the drive still ghosting my palm. By afternoon, Naomi had drafted filings, moving to preserve the audio as official evidence. For the first time, I could feel the tide shifting, the current no longer pulling me under but beginning to turn against them. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, spreading out the receipts, the photos, the scans, and now the transcript Naomi had generated from the audio. The corkboard above the table grew more crowded. Red thread connecting forged deeds to my father's letter. Doctored video clips to Sabrina's real estate listings. And now this recording tying everything back to bribery. But it still felt fragile, as though truth alone might not be enough. I stared at the phone for a long time before finally dialing Julian Reyes, the journalist who had traced the IP from the smear video. He answered on the second ring. Mara, you okay? No, I said honestly, but I have something, everything. We met the next morning at a coffee shop tucked off Main Street. I slid the folder across the table, heavy with printed copies of everything I had gathered. Julian flipped through in silence, the letter from my father, the receipts, the photos, the doctored video, alongside metadata, and finally, the transcript of the audio where Sabrina bragged about bribing the notary. He let out a low whistle. This isn't just a family feud, this is corruption. I don't want sympathy, I told him. My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. I just want the truth out. No more erasing, no more lies. Julian closed the folder with care, as if the papers themselves were dangerous. Then let's shine a light. As I walked back to my car, the morning sun hit the windows of the legal aid office across the street. And for the first time in months, I felt something like clarity. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was dismantling the story they had built to erase me. And this time, I had proof that even their voices couldn't deny. The article broke on a Thursday morning. Julian had titled it, When Home Becomes Hostile, A Daughter's Fight Against Family Fraud. By noon, it had been shared dozens of times, picked up by local blogs, whispered about in grocery store aisles and gas station lines. The anonymous Facebook page that had smeared me so viciously vanished within hours, its videos deleted, its trail cold. For once, silence worked in my favour, the silence of their erasure, not mine. But victory was never clean. That weekend, Sabrina hosted a community fundraiser at the Civic Centre. The event was dressed in wholesome banners and crockpots of chili. But I knew better. It wasn't about casseroles or community spirit. It was about optics. A chance for her to reassert her narrative, to present herself as the guardian of legacy while painting me as the villain who threatened it. Still, I went. I couldn't afford to cede the stage, even if it wasn't mine to begin with. At the check-in table, a teenager handed me a name badge. Volunteer staff, Mara Ellison, scrawled in bubble letters. My stomach dropped. I hadn't volunteered, I wasn't staff, but the girl shrugged apologetically. "This is the list Ms. Ellison gave us." I pinned it on anyway. Not because I accepted their version, but because I wanted to see it through. To watch how far they would go to erase me while keeping my body visible enough to serve their cause. Inside, the air smelled of slow-cooked beans and ambition. Folding chairs lined the walls and the crowd buzzed with chatter. People smiled politely at me, but their eyes flickered, hesitant, like they were weighing which story to believe. At the front, Sabrina stood poised at the podium, wearing a navy dress that whispered authority. Her voice carried smooth as silk. "This community is about legacy," she declared. "It's about protecting what our parents built so our children don't have to start from scratch." Applause rippled. She spoke of sacrifice, of family unity, never once naming me. Cole sat in the front row, nodding along like a faithful disciple. Behind her, a projector displayed slides of neighbourhood maps, zoning proposals, future development renderings. My eyes snagged on one in particular, a colour-coded map highlighting lots slated for redevelopment. And there it was, my father's house outlined in bold red, sitting square in the middle of what planners called a priority parcel. Twist hit like a hammer. This wasn't just sentiment or greed, it was strategy. My home, the place my father built with his hands, was positioned as a linchpin in a lucrative rezoning deal. I sank into a folding chair near the back, pressing the badge flat against my chest, as though it might brand me permanently. Volunteer staff, extra, unimportant. When the slideshow ended, people clapped enthusiastically. Sabrina basked in the glow of applause, her smile serene, her eyes scanning the room as though she had won something permanent. But I saw through it now. Every polite smile, every crafted word, every erased name, it was a mask, paper thin, hiding rot underneath. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the map on the screen. Then another of the badge pinned to my shirt. 2 more pieces of evidence, threads on the growing board in my apartment. As the crowd dispersed toward the buffet tables, I slipped out the side door, the evening air cool against my face. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Not relief, not yet, but determination. They wanted to bury me under their story, but all they had done was hand me proof of their hunger. And hunger leaves a trail. I was halfway to the parking lot when I heard the slap of sneakers against pavement. "Aunt Mara!" I turned, startled, just as Nora barreled toward me, her pigtails bouncing, her small hand clutching a folded sheet of paper. She was 6 now, maybe 7, old enough to sense the tension in the air, but too young to know how deep it cut. "I made this for you," she said proudly, thrusting the paper into my hand. I unfolded it slowly. A crayon drawing, bright and clumsy, filled the page. A house with a big, square body and a crooked triangle roof. 2 tall stick figures labelled Mom and Dad. A smaller one in between, labelled Nora. and off to the side, under the shade of a lopsided tree, stood another stick figure, arms lifted, smiling. Above it, scrawled in childish letters, Aunt Mara. My throat closed. The picture was innocent, a child's art, but it captured everything. I wasn't inside the house. I was outside, under the tree, still visible, but peripheral, an afterthought. I crouched down, forcing a smile. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. She grinned, hugged my knees, and ran back towards Sabrina, who barely acknowledged her before turning to chat with the mayor. I folded the drawing carefully, slipping it into my bag. Evidence. Not of fraud, not of bribery, but of something harder to measure, erasure woven so deeply that even a child had absorbed it as truth. Back at my apartment, I spread everything across the table, the receipts, the photographs, the transcripts, the letter from Dad, and now Nora's drawing. My corkboard had grown crowded, red threads connecting lies to faces, names to dates. Each piece of paper was a wound, but together they began to look like a map. That night, while pinning the drawing to the board, I remembered something my mother had said in the hospital. I knew about the mortgage. I chose not to intervene. The words had haunted me, but now I wondered if there was more behind them. I pulled out my laptop and searched through county filings, donation records, community board minutes. Hours passed, my eyes blurred. Then I found it, a financial disclosure form buried in the planning committee's paperwork. A gift listed under Lydia Ellison's name, marked as Community Support Fund, issued 6 months before the mortgage documents appeared. The amount was modest compared to rezoning profits, but unmistakable. Money had changed hands. My mother hadn't just stayed silent for pride. She'd been paid too. Twist struck like a blade twisting in an old wound. The woman who birthed me, who scolded me for airing family shame, had profited from that silence. I sat back, breath shallow. Betrayal piled on betrayal until it felt like the walls might cave in. Cole's fists, Sabrina's lies, and now my mother's price tag. But the despair didn't last. Instead, a strange clarity settled. Each thread on the board was another attempt to erase me. And yet here I was, documenting, preserving, refusing to vanish. I picked up the roll of red string, tying Nora's drawing to Sabrina's rezoning map, then to Lydia's disclosure record. The web grew denser, less like chaos, and more like truth taking shape. By the time I finished, the corkboard looked alive, pulsing with connections, glowing with evidence of every betrayal and every attempt to bury me. I stepped back and whispered, "You can erase me from photos, from programs, from stories. But you can't erase this." The board didn't answer, but it didn't need to. For the first time, I felt something stronger than grief. Inevitability. They had tried to bury me under silence, but silence had become my archive. And the archive was loud. The days leading up to the hearing blurred into a routine of folders, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Naomi worked like a surgeon, cutting away distractions, stitching together a case strong enough to hold against every blow my siblings might throw. Her office became a fortress of paper. Affidavits, scanned receipts, notarized transcripts of the audio Ed had captured, metadata printouts from the doctored video, and copies of the rezoning maps. "We lead with the minor status," she explained, shuffling papers with quick precision. 17 when you signed. That nullifies the mortgage on its own. Then we layer on the coercion, the doctored footage, the audio of Sabrina bragging about the notary. By the time we get to rezoning, The judge will already see the pattern." I nodded, though half my mind was elsewhere. In my bag, tucked between manila folders, was the cassette recorder. The small plastic body seemed to vibrate with its own presence, whispering of words I hadn't yet heard. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally pressed play. The tape hissed, then my father's voice filled the room, grainy but steady. "Mara is the only one who understands this house," he said. "She knows it's built from more than wood and nails. It's built from what we promised each other. She's the one who stayed." My chest tightened, tears burning hot. The words were a balm, proof that even when he was gone, he had anchored me. But then the recording shifted. Paper rustled, a sigh escaped, and his voice grew lower. "Don't trust anyone who talks about selling," he warned. "Not the neighbours, not the suits, not even your own kin. If your mother ever says it's for the best, don't believe her. Protect the house. Protect what we built." I froze. My heart hammered, the air thinning, twist cut like ice. He had anticipated betrayal, even from within the family. He had known. And he had left this message for me as if he could already see the storm gathering years before it broke. I rewound the tape, listening again, letting the words etch themselves into my bones. Each sentence wasn't just love, it was instruction, warning, prophecy. By morning, I carried the recorder to Naomi's office. She set it gently on the desk, listening with her brows furrowed, her pen scribbling notes as the tape played. "This," she said finally, "isn't just sentimental, it's testimony. It won't carry the same weight as notarized documents, but combined with everything else, it paints intent. Your father's intent." I nodded. "And he named them?" She looked at me sharply. "He did." Naomi added the transcript to the expanding binder labelled Ellison Fraud Case. When she closed it, the sound was solid, final, like a gavel, striking, early. That night, back in my apartment, I sat before the corkboard, red thread stretching like veins across paper arteries. I pinned the tape transcript at the centre, circling it in bold marker. Dad's voice wasn't just memory anymore, it was evidence. It was... The walls around me felt less like a cage and more like an armoury. Every scrap they had used to erase me now hung as proof they could not silence, and for the first time I believed I might win. The morning of the hearing dawned deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled over Springfield's narrow streets, where shopkeepers rolled up metal shutters and kids hurried to catch the school bus. Lawns were watered, dogs barked behind fences, and the world carried on as though nothing were on trial. But inside me, the storm raged, relentless, electric, impossible to quiet. Naomi picked me up in her sedan, her binder of evidence riding shotgun like another passenger. She didn't waste words. Only a nod, steady and sure, as if to lend me her strength. The courthouse smelled of floor polish and bureaucracy. We passed through security, the metal detector groaning as if it too disapproved of me. By the time we entered the courtroom, the benches were already half filled. Neighbours, reporters, curious townsfolk, all the faces that had once looked through me now stared openly, waiting to see how the story would unravel. Cole sat stiffly at the defence table, his jaw set, eyes darting toward the floor. Beside him, Sabrina was a portrait of poise, navy suit crisp, hair slicked back like polished armour. Her hands folded neatly, but her eyes flicked over me with thinly veiled disdain. A smile threatening at the corners as though she'd already won. The judge entered. Everyone rose, then sat, my palms pressed damp against my lap. Naomi opened her binder, sliding a neat stack of documents across the table. The opposing attorney rose first, tall and smug, his voice carrying confidently across the room. Your Honour, the plaintiff has a long history of emotional instability. We intend to demonstrate that Ms. Ellison has fabricated allegations of abuse and coercion in a bid to claim property she was never entitled to. Her own siblings describe her as erratic, prone to exaggeration, and estranged from the family for good reason. The words echoed, sharp as a slap. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to meet the attorney's eyes, refusing to flinch. Then Naomi stood. She adjusted her glasses, calm but resolute. Your Honour, she began, the facts are straightforward. At 17, my client was coerced into signing a mortgage document, an act unenforceable under state law. We will present receipts, tax records, and letters proving she supported the household financially. We will show doctored videos distributed to defame her, traced directly to a device used by the defendants. And we will introduce an audio recording capturing the defendants discussing their intent to force her signature and profit from the resale of the home. Her voice didn't waver once. She spoke like a hammer striking nails, every fact driven in clean and firm. The judge leaned forward slightly. Proceed. Naomi laid the groundwork, receipts first, each stamped and dated. The letter from my father, steady handwriting reminding me I was the one who stayed. The metadata reports, glowing on the projection screen, proving the video had been altered. Each piece landed like a weight on the scales, and for once the balance seemed to tip toward truth. Then came the moment I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. Naomi lifted the USB drive from its sleeve, holding it carefully as if it might burn. Finally, Your Honour, we have an audio file recorded by a neighbour. In it, the defendants clearly discuss coercion and a bribed notary. The bailiff connected the laptop to the speakers. The courtroom grew still. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a countdown. Naomi clicked play, but before the first words emerged, Sabrina shot to her feet. That's fabricated, she shouted, her composure cracking for the first time. Her voice rang through the chamber, sharp and panicked. Gasps erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Neighbours craned forward. Cole's face drained of colour, his lips parting as though he might object, but finding no words. The judge's gavel slammed once, echoing like thunder. Order! But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. For the first time, the room had seen Sabrina not as the calm guardian of legacy, but as someone cornered, rattled. Naomi's hand hovered above the laptop, waiting. The audio hadn't even played yet, and in that suspended moment, the air was electric. The entire room leaning forward, waiting to hear the voices that might finally shatter the lie. The gavel struck again, silencing the murmurs. Naomi gave the smallest nod before pressing play. At first, only the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of crickets. Then Cole's voice, sharp, undeniable. She's always been the weakest. Once she signs, we flip it. Easy money. The courtroom stirred. A cough, a whispered gasp, the scrape of a pen against paper. Then Sabrina's voice entered, cool and cutting. She won't sign without pressure. Make her. And don't worry, I already paid off the notary. He owes me." The words crackled through the speakers, louder than any scream. Sabrina stood frozen, her face pale beneath the courtroom lights. No performance now, no polished mask, just silence, damning and heavy. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Ellison, is that your voice?" Sabrina's lips parted, but no sound came. Her silence said more than any denial ever could. All eyes turned to Cole. His shoulders sagged, his fists unclenched. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like a boy caught in the act. When the judge asked, "Did you lay hands on your sister?" He bowed his head. "Yes," he whispered, "I did." Gasps rippled again. The sound felt far away to me, muffled by the pounding of my heart. "And did you hear Miss Ellison instruct you to coerce her signature?" Cole's throat worked, eyes glistening. "Yes." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Naomi's pen stilled. Reporters scribbled like frantic insects. Sabrina sat rigid, her jaw locked, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The judge removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and spoke with measured gravity. "This court finds the mortgage agreement invalid. It was signed when the plaintiff was a minor, without legal authority. Further, we acknowledge coercion, defamation, and physical abuse perpetrated by the defendants." He turned first to Cole. "You are hereby sentenced to 1 year's suspended sentence, 100 hours of community service, and mandatory counselling. A restraining order is issued, barring contact with your sister for no less than 5 years. Cole nodded numbly, tears streaking his cheeks. His voice broke as he turned toward me. "Mara, I'm sorry, I didn't—" But the words hung useless between us. "Twist 13, he cried, begging forgiveness with wet eyes. But it was too late. Apologies could not erase bruises or silence. The judge shifted his gaze to Sabrina. "As for you, this court finds evidence of fraud, bribery, and coercion. You are fined, ordered to pay restitution, and permanently barred from any claim to the property in question." The gavel struck once. Final. "The deed is restored to the sole name of Mara Ellison." The words washed over me like water too cold to bear. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room buzzed, reporters huddling, neighbours whispering, pens scratching. But I sat still, hands folded in my lap. I didn't cry, not when Cole buried his face in his hands, not when Sabrina clenched her jaw, eyes like stone, not even when the judge pronounced my father's house mine again. Instead, I felt a strange stillness, as if the storm had broken but left me hollow. I looked at Cole, his face crumpled with regret, and felt nothing. His tears slid into a void too deep for forgiveness. The bailiff called for order, ushering people out. Naomi gathered her files with calm precision, her eyes flicking to me. "You did it," she whispered. But I shook my head. It wasn't victory I felt. It was survival, laced with scars. The courthouse emptied. I rose slowly, my body stiff but unbroken, and walked toward the doors. Outside, sunlight hit me full in the face, bright and relentless. I stood on the steps, the city stretching out before me. The weight of the house, the evidence, the years of erasure pressed against me, and still I did not cry, because this wasn't an ending. It was the quiet beginning of whatever came next. When I stepped back into the house, the air was different. The cedar still lingered faintly, but beneath it was the sterile scent of emptiness, as though the walls had been holding their breath. Sabrina was there, not in fury or triumph, but bent over a suitcase. She packed in silence, her movements neat, deliberate, folding clothes with a precision that betrayed her need to keep some control. She didn't look at me until the suitcase was zipped. Our eyes met for a heartbeat, and in hers I saw not victory, not even hatred, just vacancy. She rolled the case toward the door, heels clicking against the wood my father once polished. At the threshold, she paused, waiting for a word, perhaps a curse, perhaps forgiveness. I gave her neither. The door shut with a soft click, quieter than her lies, but louder in meaning. She was gone. For a long time, I stood in the hallway, letting the silence settle. Then I opened the windows. Light spilled in, sharp and revealing, chasing shadows into corners. I gathered paint cans, brushes, and drop cloths. For hours I worked, covering walls once dulled by neglect with soft ivory. My mother's colour from years ago, but chosen this time by me, not imposed. Each stroke was reclamation, not erasure. When the walls dried, I pulled from a box the photo I'd carried for years. Me at 6, barefoot on the porch swing, laughing at something Dad had said, just out of frame. I hung it in the hallway, directly across from the front door. Let anyone who entered see me, undeniably part of this home story. On the porch, I replaced the rusted light fixture with a simple lantern glow. As dusk fell, it cast a warm halo across the steps. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the creak of boards beneath my feet. The next morning, Ed wandered over, a small clay pot in his hands. "Thought this place needed something real," he said, handing me a lavender plant. The purple buds leaned gently toward the sun. I placed it on the porch rail. "It's perfect," I told him. He tipped his cap, muttered something about fresh starts, and shuffled back to his own yard. Later that week, Nora came running up the steps, her crayon-stained fingers gripping another folded sheet of paper. She was breathless, excited. "I made you a new picture, Aunt Mara." I unfolded it carefully. Again, the house. But this time, inside the square windows, 4 stick figures stood together. Mom, Dad, Nora, and me. My name written clearly above the smiling figure inside the house. No longer banished to the tree. Tears blurred my vision. I crouched, hugged her tightly. "It's beautiful. Thank you." She grinned. "Now, you're in it where you belong." I pinned the drawing to my corkboard later, not as evidence, but as a promise. Stories could change, even the ones written in crayon. As weeks passed, I found myself at the Women's Centre downtown, standing before a small group in a classroom that smelled of chalk and coffee. 5 women sat around a table, notebooks open, eyes wary but hopeful. Survivors of silence, of betrayal, of families that had cut them out like unwanted fabric. I read aloud from the letter I had written months before, but never shared. When you are erased by family, it feels like vanishing from your own skin. But survival is writing yourself back in. No one clapped. No one needed to. A woman at the back whispered, "That's how I feel too." Another reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. In that quiet room, surrounded by women who knew the sting of erasure, I felt roots growing where once there had only been ash. That evening, I sat on the porch swing with a mug of tea, the lavender's scent carried on the breeze, the new lantern casting soft gold across the steps. Inside, the walls gleamed ivory. The photo smiled down the hallway. Nora's drawing hung beside it. The house still creaked at night. The wind still pressed against the windows, as if demanding entry. But now the echoes no longer belonged to absence. They belonged to me. I whispered into the dusk, steady and unshaken. I am not a shadow. I am the root, and I am still here.